For me, a cookbook, maybe it's because I'm a product person. For fashion, it's a product. It's a tangible thing you can wear, much like a book, is a tangible object you'll have forever, or that kind of thing. There was a moment where I wanted to put a stake in the ground and sort of say, I have something to say. I think my perspective is unique. I do come from fashion, and that's informed sort of how I like things to look. It was a moment where I said, you know what? Again, that idea of wanting to have a goal, setting a goal for yourself, and having started my own fashion line, I'm like, you know what? If I could do that, I could do anything.
Thank you so much for joining us here on this beautiful evening in San Francisco at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California. Michelle Miao, I'm a member of the Board of Governors for the club and also a producer and host in some programs here. And we're so delighted for this wonderful evening and our guest speaker tonight. And now it is my pleasure to welcome you, our wonderful guest tonight. He's an award-winning fashion designer, a culinary creator, a lifestyle expert, and also a contributing editor of The Purist. And now he is an author of this wonderful cookbook that you can get today if you don't have a copy. Family Style, Elegant Everyday Recipes Inspired by Home and Heritage. He'll be joined by the lovely Flora Sapofsky, who is also a Bay Area culture, lifestyle, and culinary writer. Let's welcome Peter Somm and Flora Sapofsky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
These are comfy chairs. Thank you so much, Michelle, for the warm introduction. I'm delighted to be here with Peter to talk all things family style. Congratulations on your book. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's still surreal and incredibly exciting. So I'm still just absorbing all the good vibes, and yeah.
And we're here to participate in those vibes. Exactly.
Fabulous.
So, Peter, before we dive into the wonderful book you just published, how would you describe yourself to somebody who doesn't know you, which is unthinkable to me? But say, you're on a road trip somewhere foreign, and they say, Peter, so what do you do? How would you describe yourself?
How would I describe myself? About 5'11", glass. No, kidding. Sorry. I would. It's interesting. I guess I'm they call it a multi-hyphenate these days, where I have had a long career in fashion, runway shows, all the things you think of when you think of high-end fashion, and it's been very lucky to do that. And I'd like to say over the last many years, I haven't pivoted. I have expanded focus. I like to sort of say that. I've expanded focus and delved into, something I've always loved as all through my life as well, just less known, which is my love of food and cooking and entertaining and that kind of thing. So I think I'm a this/this/this, a multi-hyphenate.
Yeah, which is very trendy and timely.
I know, I feel so cool.
So cool.
I feel so cool.
Yeah, so, as you mentioned, some people I'm sure here know you from your fashion days. Can you tell us a little bit about how you expanded or transitioned from your very amazing fashion career into what you're currently doing?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I think I wanted to be a fashion designer since I was in 5th grade. Like, I remember sitting at the dinner table, and, I'd always loved to draw. I was a very shy child, so drawing for me was my escape. It was my way to have my own world. And my first drawings were little triangles with little heads, little stick arms and stick legs, and I was drawing my mom. And eventually those little triangles turned into sort of a woman, and then I would draw the clothes. So it really wasn't until I realized we went on a family trip, and my sister brought back these issues of L'Officiel and Paris Vogue. I think I still have those issues.
As in your sister's right here.
Yeah,
yes.
she's right there. And I opened those pages, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is the world I want to be in. It was the early 80s, and it was, shoulder pads. It was peplums. It was the 80s glam. It was this whole fantasy world. And I realized in 5th grade, I said, this is what I want to do when I grow up. So from that moment on, I was fully focused on becoming a fashion designer. And this is before the internet. For all you young people out there, we had to go search for things, books, magazines, libraries, exactly, and really, sort of research what it meant to be that. So, really fast forward to having, my fashion line. I mean, it was at a certain point, 10 years ago, where I closed down my runway collection. And it was a really tough time. It's something where it was your goal for this many years to have a fashion line, to end it for many reasons. I felt a little, depressed, sad.
Understandably.
There was a mourning period. And it really wasn't until I sort of took the blinders off, the blinders that I had on since 5th grade, and expanded my focus to realize the other thing I loved, as much as fashion, was cooking. And it really was sort of like, once, that focus, then once you sort of take off, once the focus doesn't serve you, they do become blinders. And you kind of really have to expand and open up your world and see what else is out there. So that was when I thought, wow, I think I'm pretty good at this. And it really started that way. It started pretty, I was sort of, there's certain circumstances that brought me into it, but they ended up being something that it served me well, because I think once I sort of had the goal of really getting into food and learning how to construct recipes and play with flavors and really dive into it, it was great. And I'm somebody who kind of loves a goal. I love sort of, like this cookbook. I mean,
right. It's helpful to have one.
Yeah, exactly.
So you talked about this. So how did you go about transitioning into food? Can you tell us a little bit about your project that you did prior to this? How did it all start? I know you added a page to your homepage.
Yeah.
It was like, yes, walk us through some of your early stage things.
Yeah, I mean, it was at a certain point where my website had been basically a time capsule of my last collection, and which was 2015, which is can you believe it? 2015. That's like 10 years ago. So
time flies.
Time flies. It really does. And so I decided to redo my entire website and have it reflect everything I love. So there was the part with fashion in there. I started, I had a food section, which I called it the extra taste, and which for me is kind of came about the idea of like, people who love food, you always want that extra taste. You always want that extra spoonful of whatever it is you're eating. And they actually also call umami sort of that the
additional flavor,
that right. Extra taste. So I kind of did all the food stuff under that sort of section, and it was really, it was like you just sort of have to have faith in a way. I had a handful of recipes. At that point, it was also the pandemic had started, so I had a little bit more time to cook and develop recipes. And it's sort of like you just have to have faith sometimes that if you work hard and you jump off that diving board, you just know that there's water there. You're like, okay, it has to happen.
It's a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah. Thank you.
So at which point did you feel or start to feel that you're an authority on food or can claim that space where you mostly do that and known for it?
Oh my God, I know. This is like a therapy session. I love it. Oh my gosh. I'm going to start crying and lying down.
Maybe later a little bit.
Exactly. I think I would say sort of, there was a large part of me that felt like I had imposter syndrome. I mean, I had been in fashion for a very long time, and people knew me for fashion. I was supported by Anna Wintour at Vogue. Like, I was in all the magazines.
CDFA nominee.
Yeah, exactly. Celebrities wore my clothing, all this kind of stuff, yada, yada, yada. And which was all amazing, obviously, but it took a while for me to really feel like, oh, are people going to just think I'm sort of dabbling, like, oh, what a fun little hobby. I think it wasn't until probably I had a spread in Bon Appetit. It was the new editor, Dawn Davis. I met her, and I met her because I was knocking at her door like for days. No, I'm kidding. But you really do have to sort of put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And I got a story in there, a well story, which in magazine talk, well story is all the spreads in the middle of the magazine. So these are the big, gorgeous pictures, the whole thing.
It was a holiday issue, I believe.
It was Thanksgiving,
Yes.
and it was my take on my take on a Thanksgiving meal. So it was sort of Cantonese flavors mixed into kind of a Thanksgiving meal. And I was talking to the editors, and a magazine, constructing a magazine really is like a jigsaw puzzle. So I was talking to the editor, like, well, please don't do turkey because we already have turkey things happening. Please don't do this because we already have some of this happening. I think, don't do pumpkin pie because we already have pumpkin pie covered. I'm like, I don't know, what am I going to do? So I ended up doing
A Wellington.
A Wellington. I did a chassis Wellington. I used a pork loin, which is a more leaner cut, than normal chassis, which is usually the shoulder or other sort of more fattier parts. And then I did a chassis sauce. And for anyone who doesn't know, chassis is like the most amazing sort of barbecue-y, sweet, savory, delicious sauce known to me ever. It's probably, I would say, top 5 sauces if we had to start going into our top 5 lists. And I think it was really when I saw myself kind of like in print, and it wasn't even just that, it was people who made it, you know what I mean? And that, it was sort of similar to, fashion. The fashion show is this amazing fantasy, right? But then seeing somebody on the street who doesn't know who you, doesn't know you in your outfit or your dress, and you're just like, that, it's kind of emotional because you're like, what I'm doing has a life beyond just the sketch or the runway show or the picture in Vogue. It has a life. It's in somebody's closet. It's a part of their life.
It's validating.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's the same when people were making the Wellington, which is not an easy, many, many steps to a Wellington. That's my takeaway for the day. Many, many steps for a Wellington.
Well, I feel like that spread also gives us a hint into the style of your cookbook later on.
Yeah, exactly.
Which we'll get into very soon, I promise.
Yeah,
Here we go. So at which moment in this busy life, you were like, oh my God, I feel like I actually want to have, or maybe need to have a cookbook?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was talking to a friend, and he's somebody had some friends in the food world at that point, and I met with him at a cafe, and I said, I think I want to write a cookbook. And it was the first time I had sort of uttered those words aloud, and I was like, is he going to laugh in my face? He obviously didn't. But I think for me, a cookbook, maybe it's because I'm a product person. For fashion, it's a product. It's a tangible thing you can wear, much like a book, is a tangible object you can, you'll have forever, or that kind of thing. So I think there was a moment where I wanted to put a stake in the ground and sort of say I have something to say. I think my perspective is unique. I do come from fashion, and that's informed sort of how I like things to look. They say you eat with your eyes, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of that kind of thing. It was a moment where I said, you know what? Again, that idea of wanting to have a goal, setting a goal for yourself, and knowing that it's going to be a long, strange, crazy, hectic road to get there. But having started my own fashion line, I'm like, you know what? If I could do that, I could do anything.
Yeah. And once you say something, I feel like it materializes almost.
Yeah.
All you have to do is kind of get it done.
It's so true. It's sort of like when you're in therapy. I don't know why I bring up therapy so much, but
because the comfy chair.
Yeah, I know, it's the chairs. And exactly. But when you utter the words, you have to form the coherent thought to come out of your mouth so somebody else can understand, whether it's a therapist or a friend or whatever. But yeah, it makes it real. You're putting it out in the universe.
So then, how was the journey to the finished product? Can you tell us a tiny bit about it? How did it go?
It was, the journey to write a cookbook is a many-layered, many-stepped process. For fashion, we had 4 collections a year. You are cranking it out. You are always looking toward the future, but the future is literally 3 months away, 2 months away. You are just
Chasing the future.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're churning out product. So to sort of pivot to working on something for 3.5 years, one thing, which I know if you're an architect or you're in other fields, that's pretty
Yeah.
standard. You're used to that. But I think for
Or an author of a
exactly,
fiction book.
exactly. But coming from the world of fashion, where things are that it just turns, it's so quick. It was crazy. Between sort of getting the concept of the book together down, and for cookbooks with a proposal, you have to have about 6 recipes that are all tested.
I was going to ask you if you pitched your book around.
Yeah, so you have to write the intro. You have to write probably around 6 to 8 recipes. They have to be foolproof because the editor, the publishing house people, they may test the recipes.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be photographed, and I photograph everything on my own. I didn't photograph the book. I worked with an amazing team, which we'll get to later. But
Mm-hmm.
on my website, everything I photographed. So I photographed everything. It had to be all, perfect. And it went out to a bunch of, shopped around with my agent to a bunch of publishing houses, and HarperCollins and Harvest picked it up.
Sold.
Yes, and I was amazed. They wanted to give me money for it. I was like, I'm going to get $10 for my advance. But
This was not the case, I imagine.
No, it
Yeah.
wasn't the case. But it was, And then from there on, I had basically 1 year. Like that one phone call, I had 1 year to test more than 100 recipes, write the head notes for every recipe, chapter openers, intros, sort of the whole thing. And I didn't have a ghostwriter or anything like that,
Right.
which a lot of people do, which is great. There's no judgment at all.
Right. By the way, it really shows because there's so much humor and kind of personal touches to those intros.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tried to really keep the writing authentic to kind of how I am, I think. And I wanted to be approachable and interesting and funny and not crazy serious,
Right.
So I had sort of all these months to test everything. Then after I test the recipes, I have two recipe testers who then retested the recipes. Because again, once it's in print, if the recipe's wrong, it's just like it's not cute. It's not cute. Like it's not like online recipes online. We can fix it like something. And then after that, manuscript was set. Then you shoot it. And for me, that was the most exciting part, to get a team together, to get sort of the dream team. Linda Zhao did the photography, Sue Lee did the food styling, and then Sarah Smart did the prop styling. And we shot the book. It was about a 2-week shoot. You really want the manuscript to be set before you shoot, like all the recipes, because the last thing you want to do is reshoot things. Like the book has to be like lock, stock, and barrel, like this is it, and then you kind of go in and shoot everything. So
yeah. How involved were you in that process? I imagine very involved.
Yeah, pretty involved, just because, again, sort of my design background. I put together copious amounts of mood boards.
That's fun. That's fun.
I love a mood board.
Yeah.
I love a mood board. So in terms of the design of the book, I was referencing a lot of like old Harper's Bazaar magazines from sort of this era of Liz Tilberis, who was an editor who brought in Fabian Baron. This was a sort of very moment in fashion for me. So I kind of wanted to reference some fashion
It's interesting.
moments, but keep it still kind of not so designy. But yeah, and on set, I love, one of the most exciting parts was being like on that photo shoot, working with a team. I love working with a team. I love people doing what they do best and being able to be there and, kind of be a part of it. And I think, because ultimately recipe testing is a very solitary affair. You are in the kitchen playing Jenga with your refrigerator to get everything in and cooking. I have video of my kitchen. It was crazy.
Your own kitchen.
My own kitchen. Wow. My kitchen was crazy. I have sometimes I just do a video across the countertop and it just looked nuts. Because you're writing notes, you have ingredients, you have you're trying to like get your timings right.
You're in the process. You're in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, it's creativity is sometimes not very neat.
So we all know there are so many cookbooks out there.
Yeah.
Right? I personally get like one email a week about a new cookbook coming out, and I get them to my house. Did you have any thoughts about how your cookbook will be different and how will it stand out? And what place will it occupy on the shelf among all the other books people own?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that sort of was the $1 million question when I wanted to do a cookbook, because there are so many cookbooks out there. So what is going to make Family Style stand out? What's going to make it different? And, you know, I think it's really all about, you know, I think people, the word authenticity is bandied about. It's a word that's used quite often. I mean, about, you know, ad campaigns and everything.
Especially since the age of social media.
Exactly. What is real, what is not. And so the initial inspiration for the cookbook came from this, my grandmother, she's, the book is dedicated to her and my mom. Hi, Mom. And, but my grandmother has been gone 20 years. So, but we kept her apartment, and some of her stuff is still in there. And one day, they were in there and found a little spiral notebook of recipes. And it spanned 20 years. And I think almost nobody knew about this little recipe book. I think recipes were written in cursive or Chinese, Chinese characters. Each recipe was, each page was numbered. Each recipe was dated.
Wow.
There were little comments like "very good,"
"Go grandma,"
or whatever. And I think it started from 1958 or something. And it was, to me, as somebody, again, for any family, a person who was, any family member, but much less somebody who loved cooking and was sort of in that mindset, to see this cookbook or this recipe notebook was sent me kind of down a path of discovery about these recipes. And like some I was familiar with, some she probably wrote down and never made. And that's kind of how it all started. It started by sort of this recipe notebook, and then, well, that really did turn into a mini column for Saveur magazine, where I had 5 installments, and each one was, I took a recipe from that notebook and made it, tested it, and there was one that was like tofu fa, which is like a tofu kind of sweet-ish dessert, and a few other Lionheads meatballs, that kind of thing. And that from there, I was like, there's something here, And I think that's where it all started. When you have an idea that's
authentic,
truly authentic, and we'll find the synonyms for authentic.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. To me, it felt like something unique. It felt like something unique, and coming from my perspective, from my fashion background and coming to New York, growing up in the Bay Area.
Which we'll also talk about.
It felt like something that had a unique point of view, and that was truly something exciting for me.
Yeah. Now, do you have any pet peeves when it comes to cookbooks, if you're in the mood for some shade, I don't know, or things you're not interested in to have, or you're like, not my book, it's not going to be in the...
Oh God! So one thing that comes to the top of my mind, I'm trying to think. I know we had a conversation a couple weeks ago, so I'm trying to remember what we talked about. But one thing I know I wanted in the cookbook, I wanted every recipe to have a photo, because a lot of recipes. A lot of cookbooks don't, and that's usually pretty standard, just based on the number of pages and what you can fit into a cookbook. But for me, I was like, well, if there's no picture, that to me means the author didn't think that recipe was like,
and it's just a bummer.
Important. And I am also a very visual person, and I want to see what it looks like and that kind of thing. So I know, for me, that was important. Every recipe had a photo, and it was. To get there was, I had to it was a lot of scheduling with the team to make sure that happened. Did I mention, what else?
Anything you dislike about, aside from no photos?
Anything else?
When you're a consumer of a cookbook?
did we talk about something on our call that I'm forgetting? Let's think here. I don't know.
No.
No, really? Okay, all right.
You're being put on the spot.
No, I know. My memory's shot because, I mean, my cookbook came out last Tuesday in New York, and it's been a total whirlwind. So I'm happy I'm talking in full sentences. I mean, cheers to that, right?
Yeah.
Yay. I think for me, going back to the sense of authenticity. I love cookbooks that do have a little story behind it. There are plenty of cookbooks out there that says, these are your 20 air fryer meals for your weekday. There's obviously a place for that, and
for utility,
and they sell very well. Single subject cookbooks sell incredibly well, but I love a cookbook that can live in the kitchen, to be used, that can be on the coffee table, to be admired, and then also to be read before you go to bed. Because I don't know about you guys, I will read cookbooks. If I'm not watching YouTube videos for 4 hours, I will read a cookbook before I go to bed. It to me is like so relaxing.
I can relate. I told you I read cookbooks while I eat.
Yeah,
just kind of as a companion.
Yeah, it's like a meta kind of moment, right? It's like
meta moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you mentioned earlier how working on a cookbook versus a collection is a different time span. Are there any other major differences when you approach a cookbook versus working in fashion on the product?
I mean, it's interesting. Starting out the process of doing the cookbook and even just, developing recipes and thinking about food, I kind of assumed there would be no overlap in a way. I kind of was like, these are two different things. They are, even just the philosophy of high fashion, it's sort of a little bit like you can't sit with us, right? Where the food world is, come sit with us. Inherently, it's about gathering around the table, and that's food does that, But then I realized my process in terms of the creative process is quite similar. Like I said earlier, you eat with your eyes, right? So it's same way when I design a dress, it has to look great if you're looking at it online or in the store, but just in the same way that outfit has to feel great, the fabric has to be nice, it has to fit right. So too does that recipe, that dish has to taste great and be delicious and be something wonderful to eat. And, in my clothing sort of fashion philosophy, I've always done clothes that I've hoped I've done clothes that are called front of closet. It's a very industry term. These are front of closet clothes. So this is the sweater you want to wear all the time. This is the blazer.
A great term,
that you just love putting on. You feel great when you put it on. So the front of closet is the opposite of the ball gown that you have in your, whatever.
Yeah, once in a while.
Exactly. Yeah. So my goal was always to have recipes that were front of closet. Recipes that you want to make again and again. And I think that are, simple by appearance, but big on flavor. And so that really, so that became sort of those parallels where I was like, oh, I'm sort of approaching them weirdly in the same way. The fundamentals and the technicalities obviously are completely different. But in terms of my creative process, I was like, oh, okay, I'm sort of looking at it the same way.
Interesting. Yeah. And then you mentioned, the can't sit with us versus the sit with us.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the bigger ways in which these industries are different as someone who's been to both now?
They are very different. I mean, I think, I think coming from fashion in the food world, again, I felt, I was a little nervous. I wasn't sure how I would be taken, perceived, or whatever. But the people in the food world have been amazing. Just the nicest, most welcoming, most generous with their information kind of people, especially with writing the cookbook. There was so many friends who I consider friends now, who are in the food world or write for the New York Times, recipes for the New York Times, or have written 20 books or whatever it may be. They're like, call me anytime if you have any questions. I can talk now. Oh, you have to find a photographer. They cost that much. Okay, you should think about this and this and this. I mean, so I think the wealth of information and the wealth of sharing is, I'm not going to generalize the entire
Of course.
industry, but my experiences have been of real generosity of spirit. Fashion maybe is a little bit different. I think, fashion people hold their cards closer to their chest a bit more.
More gatekeeping,
A
shall
little
we say?
bit more gatekeeping is probably a good way to put it. And it's not, one's not good and one's not bad. It's just they are quite different, and it is, I was talking to my mom and the other day, and I was saying, when I did clothing, I did designer level clothing. So these were blouses that were $800. These were dresses that were $1,200, $4,000. These were expensive clothes worn by 0.001% of the population. I've just done a book that costs, at most $40. That that is reaching so many more people, and that's not lost on me how kind of exciting that is and amazing, and I'm even more grateful that I can actually sort of share what I'm doing with that many more people.
Yeah.
And it's pretty rad.
It's a great way to think about it, yeah. I also started my career as a fashion writer, and when I transitioned into writing about food, I noticed how the food world is a little softer towards you, a little more, like you said, welcoming and just warmer.
The other thing, at fashion parties, nobody eats. They walk around like, I'm good, thank you, I'm good. Oh, no, not food parties. Food parties, people are like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. It's a totally different thing. I love it.
That's a great...
Yeah. Wait, you probably, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true, right?
You kind of pretend to eat, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then going through your wonderful intros, I noticed that when you were working predominantly in fashion, food was a kind of a comforting companion to you. Is my observation correct? Was that?
Absolutely. I consider myself like an outgoing, shy person, and so especially when I was a kid, I was so shy. I mean, I could barely look people in the eye. I was super shy. And so it wasn't really until I started my fashion line where I started my line in like 2000 basically, which is so long ago, which is so crazy. Anyway, and I'm going to bring up my therapist again, and this was a different therapist, and I was
wherever you are.
I was at my therapist's office, and I was like lying there, and this is also, she made me lie down, so this is like intense. This is like intense therapy, twice a week too.
Classic.
I was like, is this good or bad? I don't know. And I was like, and I just started my fashion line. I was lying there, and I'm like, oh, I have to be famous. I can't hide behind a curtain and just have my clothes be out there. I have to advocate for myself. I have to explain the clothing. People want to know the thought behind what I'm doing. I have to be out there. And so so I think, wait, now I'm losing the question. What was the question again?
About how you found comfort in food, maybe at a
Okay, so now we're back on
party
track.
that wasn't quite your speed, or
So back on track. So so fashion again. It's a sort of can be very intense. There's you're doing fashion shows. There's a lot of outward facing kind of events to go to, and
it's exhausting.
It's exhausting, yeah, and it's exhilarating too. Don't get me wrong; it's exhilarating, scary, nauseous, exciting, all those good things and not so good things. But food was always the thing that I could come home, close the door, lock the door, and make some food and be in the kitchen. Sometimes I didn't have any music on or anything; it was just quiet. Sometimes I had some Broadway show tunes on, and I would make something that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. I would eat it, and then it was gone. There is this finite moment with eating where it is, there's raw ingredients, and there's a process, and then it's eaten, and it's gone. But for me, that's what kept my feet on the ground. It really did.
I was literally going to say it's very grounding.
Yeah, exactly.
To cook and consume food.
Yeah,
It's very in the moment.
And there's actually one recipe. I call it gala carrots. It's a roasted carrot recipe that I have made a million times, and it really started because I was I had invited to the Met Gala. So Anna Wintour presides over the Met Gala, which, if you don't know, it happens at the Metropolitan Museum of Art once a year.
Has a theme.
There's a theme to it. It is a red carpet on steroids. It is because the irony is, whereas the Oscars or anything else, there's a red carpet, but then there's an actual show people see. This is for the person observing. There's just the red carpet. That's it. People go inside and you don't see what's going on.
And then pretend eating.
Yeah. And so so the tickets are $1 trillion, but if you're, Anna, who's been very supportive of my career, but so this is just a little, funny side note. This year I was going by myself, and normally you're paired up with an actress or somebody where you can have somebody with you and fuss over and that kind of thing. But this year I was going by myself, and you can't say no when Anna says, "Are you going to the Met Ball?" You can't be like, "No, thanks. I got to watch Jeopardy." That's just gonna happen. So I had the limo drive around. Probably 4 times around the block, and I had probably had a bit of tequila before I got there. Got in the car, and I was like, I'll just be late. I'm just gonna run up the stairs,
Fashionably.
go in.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I forgot all the cool people show up late. So I was on the red carpet, and Rihanna was behind me, and then the Olsen twins. I was like, oh my God. Anyway, so it was a lot. And so after the whole event was over, I was wearing a tuxedo. I was like sweating, and I was like, I need to go home. There was always these after parties afterwards, so everybody's like dance, and party. I literally left the moment you could leave, ran down the stairs, ran like 1 block over to Madison. I was on 5th. I went to 5th. It's on 5th. I jumped in the cab, went home, and I realized I was starving. And in the fridge was this sad bunch of carrots, and I put them in the oven. I didn't realize that they were at 450 instead of like 425 or something. So they became, and I was like, oh crap. But they came out and they were charred and delicious and tender. All the sugars had caramelized, so you had that inherent sweetness from the carrots.
Carrots are sneakily good.
Carrots are not even sneakily. They're just out and proud good. And then I dressed it with this sort of gochujang and honey, kind of make sure that I had, again, I just had all these pantry things. So that's sort of how this, out of my social anxiety, this recipe was born. Who knew?
Incredible. So let's dive into the actual cookbook, which is, again, incredible. What are some of your early childhood memories? You grew up here in the Bay Area, right here. What do you remember kind of inspired you or maybe shaped you to be the cook you are now?
Well, for sure, my earliest memories are being in the kitchen with my grandmother and also my mom. My grandmother lived in San Francisco. We grew up in Mill Valley, right across the Golden Gate Bridge. So, my sister and I, we probably saw our grandmother once a week from the day I was born to the day I went to college. And so we were, both very close. A lot of the cousins had moved to different cities. We stayed, my mom stayed. So I felt very lucky, that we had that time with her. And so there was many memories of trying to be a sous chef, sometimes getting the privilege of cutting something. Sometimes she would be shooed away. But making wontons on her dining table, which is an all afternoon affair. And then all her cooking, of course. I think cooking was for her, of course, a love language. And, she was the matriarch of a huge family, and many who are out here tonight. And I thank you for being here, cousins, aunts, uncles, everybody.
So fun.
And so those memories, and then, my mom, was, a self-professed health nut growing up. And also a lover of French food. So, I have memories being in the kitchen with that. My sister also was a great cook. I mean, still is to this day. But there was this French thing. So like making crepes in the morning and learning how to make crepes from them and knowing how to have 2 pans going and making sure the butter wasn't like too hot. Food really was at the center of a lot of what we did. I mean, I think it's a running family joke that like we talk about our next meal at our current meal, which I think a lot of families can probably relate. You know, you're eating, you're like, okay, what are we doing for dinner?
Yeah.
I mean, are we going here? Are we going there? Like,
There's that great page with the quotes about talking
Yeah.
about food from your family.
yeah. So food is definitely has been a part of my life. And being in the Bay Area also, I think there is such a confluence of influences.
Chez Panisse, have you? Chez Panisse.
Chez Panisse, this is the Chez Panisse and Alice Waters and the birthplace of, sort of the idea of local seasonal cuisine, which, in the 70s, early on it was iceberg lettuce and a few apples and the red delicious apples in the grocery store. So I think, being sort of here in the 70s and 80s at a time when food was changing and expanding and, again, I'm going to say confluence of influences 10 times really fast right now. So I think that was, there was a lot that sort of happened with the influence of my family.
Right.
And then just being in the Bay Area.
Yeah, and then the book is really filled with these wonderful stories about your mom and grandmother and other women in your life. What was important to you when you were diving into these stories, researching them, and bringing them into the book with you?
Yeah, I think the thing that was really important to me, I mean, besides sort of the recipes, because I knew there were certain recipes that of my mom's and my grandmother's that I had to have in there, but was really to honor them. And, again, like I said, my grandmother's been gone 20 years. And I think, again, she was the matriarch of the family. She had there were 6 kids. My grandmother and grandfather came over in the early 50s with 6 kids. She didn't really know how to cook that well because, in Asia, it's not that unusual to have a cook or somebody to help cook. But, she came over and it's for me, it's a family story. It's an immigrant story. It's a story about being Chinese, being Asian in America. And I really wanted to honor that. And I think that was sort of always, that was the North Star in a way for every recipe to honor, my mom and my grandmother and these, 2 amazing women. So, and that really, I think that was sort of the guiding light to making sure that there was that through line throughout the book.
Yeah, and speaking of a through line, what would you say is a through line that goes through your recipes? If there is any.
Yeah. The through line, I would say, my philosophy, I'm kind of an impatient person. So I like recipes that are big on flavor, but that aren't super crazy or too complicated to make. Again, that whole sort of front of closet idea. Like so to pare the recipe down to what I believed are the essentials, based on kind of heavily, relying on like sort of a wardrobe of, pantry staples, soy sauce, hoisin sauce, miso, anchovy paste, all these sort of flavor bombs that can live in your fridge or your pantry or your spice cabinet, and you can really pull them out and mix them up in different ways at a moment's notice and have big flavor. So I think ease of use, because if I look at a cookbook and the recipe is longer than the recipe ingredient list is longer than a certain, I don't know, whatever number I'm feeling like is too long that day, I'm just going to move on.
Yeah, maybe that's a pet peeve, too long of a recipe.
Too long of a recipe. I know.
Yeah. And then also what I've noticed is, going back to that Wellington recipe, there are quite a lot of interesting crossovers between different cuisines.
Yeah.
Is that something you relate to?
Absolutely. I think there's a term sort of like third culture,
Right.
where, it's the food of your its but also the food of where you are. And, it's sort of that melding together is sort of its own thing. So, and as somebody I was born here, and with a Chinese background, I think there was already inherently a mix in sort of the cultural mix of kind of how I grew up. And so it felt natural to me to sort of play with, listen, I'm not going to, sort of do a classic Peking duck or a classic, bao or something. For me, there's people that do that amazingly well and can really present that in the way that it can be, But for me, I guess it's the creative part of me where I love flavor, and the flavor can be anchovy paste, and it also can be gochujang. So it sort of becomes sort of like, how do I put together sort of all these umami bombs and these flavor bombs that feel balanced and can make sense. And I think, food culture, food is constantly evolving. Food culture is not a stagnant thing. It is constantly evolving. And I think, a lot of people, friends who have cookbooks coming out also are exploring this, because this is, where we're at, where we're sort of seeing how different ingredients can come together, which normally maybe haven't. For me, at the end of the day, it's flavor is flavor, and I do. I always make sure I want to honor where that ingredient is from and understand it. Like, what is za'atar, or what is where is it from? How is it used? It's not about just sort of willy-nilly pulling things together. I think there has to be thought put into it.
There's some also really playful formats I found of form and shape and kind of how do you incorporate different ingredients, like a rice cake, lasagna.
Oh yeah.
I don't even know how to pronounce.
Yeah, pizzagna. Yeah. For me, food is 99% of the time it's comfort. Whether it's, so I have this recipe in the book, and it uses Korean rice cakes, which are they're not the styrofoam cracker things you find in the center aisle. These are little glutinous rice kind of discs that are chewy and bouncy and really delicious. And I kind of turned them into almost like, I took them and baked ziti in a way, and put them together. I think my sister, you made it. Didn't you make it? Is it good? Okay, good. Endorsement from my sister. So yes. And
it's worth everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, sometimes it's just like you want something that's a big, delicious mouthful.
Yeah. And I think it's really fun and relatable when you have these recipes too.
Yeah.
People can.
I do like sort of taking classics and tipping them on their head. And I think it's fun to sort of do something familiar, but give it your own twist. I mean, I have a recipe in there for sort of sole meunière, which again is a classic French dish. Very Julia Child's, first, her aha moment dish. And again, my mom's love of French food, but instead of using lemon, so it's technically a breaded, lightly breaded sole that is then, pan fried in butter and then squeezed with lemon.
Delicious.
Very simple, delicious. So I took a twist on it, and I used lime instead of lemon, and then I added a touch of fish sauce to the butter. So again, I'm just giving it a little bit of my touch.
Yeah. So I have a couple of more questions before we jump to the audience questions. You spoke about the food world evolving, right? You started your career in fashion before social media, before Instagram, before TikTok, before the internet even,
yes.
right? How have you...
Jesus, yeah. I feel ancient. Okay. I'm going to start talking about my therapist again. No, go ahead.
So speaking of the therapist, how have you, the shy boy, who couldn't look people in the eye, have adapted to this really fast-paced kind of way of being constantly online, being the face of your brand, and basically kind of kind of an influencer in food, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, again, yeah, I did start, I was sort of the final generation in terms of my fashion career that started before online shopping and before everything else that entailed. So I kind of felt like I came in at the tail end of sort of quote unquote maybe the heyday of sort of what the traditional kind of fashion was, where your path to success back then, where if you're starting a fashion line was to get a mention in Vogue, and then get like Bergdorf's or Saks or Neiman's to come see you. That was it. That
Easy.
was it. Easy, not easy, but it was simpler for sure. And then, of course, now it's vastly different. The world is much bigger. The amount of designers are so many more. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of sort of, you know, being somebody who is part of their job is to be present online. It is. Again, it's sort of like I look at it as a job. You know, it's not who I am. I still keep, you know, I still feel like I want to make sure I still have boundaries in terms of what I share and what I don't share. Which there are a lot of influencers who do share probably everything.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance to keep.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, I've tried to sort of maintain some level. I mean, you know, in my fashion days, you know, it was you were that mysterious designer that just sort of like showed everybody just the glittery parts of your life, and that's not the internet now. It's people want to see authenticity, you know, or whatever. You know, they want to see the cracks and the realness, and which in itself is kind of freeing. You know, you don't have to put on this veneer of like, I'm a fashion designer. You can be a bit more yourself. But I think it's just more about having boundaries. You know.
Yeah, but is it easy for you to be out there and kind of curate your persona and come in and out of the internet world?
I've gotten used to it. Yeah, and I'm, you know, listen, I'm grateful that, you know, as sort of somebody who I guess technically an influencer. I mean, an influencer, right, is when brands basically pay you to sell to promote some of their goods.
You have a collaboration with a brand. It's even better.
Yes. I actually do have a spice collaboration.
Yes.
So that was with Burlap and Barrel, which is it's a spice. Do we have a big sign? Do we have a QR code? We didn't think about this. Oh my gosh, I got to buy my spices. So Burlap and Barrel is an amazing spice brand that does like single source, works with farmers and different vendors and gives back to communities. But anyway, so I have a spice collection with them, 3 spices. They're all based on 5 spice because for me, 5 spice is life. And
I love their names too.
Yeah, so they're each named for a chapter in the book. One is called Bird's the Word, so it's technically a 5-spice sort of poultry seasoning based on my mom's famous 5-spice chicken. I've added some other ingredients in there, and I actually use it, honestly, for roasted vegetables. Anything savory, I just put it on. The other one's more of a sweet one, which is great with baking, and it also has like vanilla in there and stuff. And then the last one is kind of like a love child of furikake and za'atar in a way. So a sprinkling spice that has sesame, also has nori flakes and other spices that I sprinkle on eggs and everything like that. Oh my God, I'm totally picturing that.
Everyone's hungry right now, I feel like.
So so go buy it on my website, petercrum.com.
Absolutely. So some audience questions. This is a really fun one. Literally, what is the most fun thing that happened while creating your book?
That is a really good question.
That you can share in an audience. Yeah.
The most fun thing that happened, I think for sure, I mentioned it before. It was when we shot the book. The whole process of having a photographer there. This was a studio that has a kitchen in it, and so it's made for food shoots. So there's a kitchen there, and food was being made, this being brought out, the stylist was doing their thing. I would say that was probably the most fun, because you're seeing what you've worked on for literally 2.5, 3 years come into fruition. Like, that's the photo. I mean, there was these still lifes that we shot that I was inspired by Dutch master paintings, and I wanted to take everyday Chinese ingredients and have them photographed like Dutch masters. I want to elevate these amazing products that, soy sauce and things like that. And these photos for me, they were fun, but when the first shot came, my photographer Linda shot it, I started crying. I was like, this is like everything I wanted, and just so beautiful. And I had actually tucked some of my grandmother's things in there, some of her mahjong pieces,
Nice.
her kitchen towels, some of her figurines, her colander, which I don't use anymore because it's metal. I don't know what's like going to leach out of it, but it made a great, thing there in there. So for me, I think doing the photo shoot was definitely the most fun.
Wonderful. The next question is, are your recipes easy to find ingredients for?
I'm going to say yes. I think my whole philosophy for the book is, if you have a pantry that has, a good, a nice, decent size amount of things, if you're armed with the right ingredients, and a lot of these ingredients can live in your refrigerator door for, a while. Again, soy sauce, miso, gochujang, a hunk of Parmesan or Pecorino, these, I think you can really, if you have all the right things.
Right, and you buy them once, maybe, or twice.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
You have them for a
And
while.
you have them for a while. It is sort of like, imagine like a little black dress. That's the chicken. How are you going to accessorize it? Fashion analogy. Love it. Are you going to take the gochujang? Are you going to take the, whatever other spice, So it's really about being able to play with these different ingredients, these pantry staples. And I think most of them are widely available at most grocery stores. And they're also, you can get them online. The only ingredient I would say is maybe in this one recipe is that you can't find everywhere is black garlic.
It's a good one to experiment with if you find it.
Yeah, it's a great one. Though it's a short rib recipe, and then I've skipped that sometimes and just thrown in a dozen cloves of regular garlic, and it's still great. So.
Next question. I really love this one. Thank you for being a multi-hyphenate AAPI artist. How do you hope to inspire future AAPI artists?
Wow. I think being present, being out there, and being vocal about who you are and what you love to do, and hopefully what you love to do is also, something that other people will resonate with. I think that in itself is the most important thing, being out there. And then I also think, using, I'm not Beyonce or anything like that, but like, if I have a voice, speak out about things that are important to me, whether it's what's going on in this country or what's going on in my backyard, and being an advocate for those who, or to shine a light on things that I hope are important to other people as well. So I think, you try to really not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, And that's W-A-L-K, not W-O-K, okay?
On a much lighter note, I love this one, and I love the handwriting. It's very kind of flowery. What kind of meal do I serve to impress?
Well, anything from my cookbook is going to impress massively. So that's like a really easy question. Though in the cookbook, I do, if I tried to make sure, like, if you're going to make this, you could try to make it with this. Like the other night, I made the hoisin honey roast chicken, which is on my cover, and I suggest to make these green beans with it. And the great part about it is because when the chicken is resting, you throw the green beans in the same hot oven at the same temperature, and those are done at the same time. So I do make sure there's some streamlining going on.
Okay, I hope you got your answer. And in continuation to that, what is your favorite dessert? And that's a great question because the dessert chapter is beyond,
oh my gosh,
in my opinion.
Oh my gosh. The dessert chapter is called Not So Sweet because as Asians, we like our desserts not so sweet. And I think for most of us, my grandmother, my mom, I'm sure it's like, good, not so sweet, Like that's like the ultimate compliment. Yeah, it's funny because I love desserts. I think I instinctively am more of a savory cook. You know, they say savory cooking is more of an art, and baking and desserts are more of a science because you really have to be specific.
Precision, yes.
Yeah, and precision can sometimes be like a downer. But I think my favorite. Recipe in the dessert section would be my grandmother's apple cake. Mm-hmm. It was something that. I remember, like, whenever we would go over to her apartment, she'd be like, should I make apple cake? And it'd always be like, yes, you know? And it was, again, it's like the most amount of apples just barely held together by cake. Mm-hmm. I added a little bit of a caramel drizzle and ice cream on the side, which she didn't do. I feel like she'd approve, though. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love a fruit-centered dessert. I think it's my favorite to end the meal, personally.
Absolutely.
Another fascinating question, which I really want you to think deep about. Who was eating all of your recipes without a restaurant?
Oh, God. It's funny. So I've lived in my building since 2000. Wait, I can't count. 2000. When did I move in? No. 1996, I moved into my apartment. And so the doorman, I mean, I've known them for a million years. They're all great. So they have all been recipients of my food. Mm-hmm. I have friends in the building that have gotten food. Yeah, it's 100 recipes. I developed more. And for sure, there was times where I had to make things 2 or 3 times because they just weren't right. So yeah, I actually give a shout out to them in my acknowledgments because they would actually tell me like a little too much salt or a little too much spice. I'm like, okay, good to know, And so they've been great. I mean, listen, I wouldn't give them food if it would look terrible. It was disgusting. As long as it was somewhat presentable. But pasta, rice dishes, chicken, desserts, of course, popular. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Yeah, and then Heather and Victor, I love that you signed this with your name. Want to know, what is your favorite meal to cook?
Oh, gosh.
You got to pick a favorite.
My favorite meal to cook? Well, I would say, I'm just going to add to that from the cookbook. Actually,
obviously.
I think my favorite thing that I've cooked lately, and that it's a little bit seasonal, but I still love it, are the short ribs. Mm-hmm. I love something that's low and slow in the oven, that's just got a depth of flavor with the sauce. And that, honestly, this is a short rib where you're literally just stirring off the short ribs, and then you're just adding in liquids. You're not cutting up carrots and onions and things. You're just throwing the garlic in there. If you have black garlic, great. Anyway, so I feel like that one, I've made that dish 3 times in the last month and a half.
What would you serve it with?
I serve it with steamed rice. Yes, you gotta have rice. Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, 9 years old. I hope it's Aria. Wants to know, how did you get started? And do you have advice for someone who wants to start, I assume, in either the fashion or the food world while being 9 years old?
Oh, I think, well, hello, Aria, wherever you are. Hello. Hi, how are you? Were you talking about fashion or food or both? Food.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think the best advice I can give is to always keep cooking, cook all the time and explore new ingredients and always be curious. I think that's so important. And also, what I did when I wanted to be a fashion designer as a kid is I tried to learn as much as I could about the history of fashion. So I was learning about like old designers from back in the day. I was learning about different eras of fashion. I was learning about kind of what different fabrics were. So I think the same thing with cooking. And it's fun. I mean, learn as much as you can about like Julia Child or other chefs or, great people in the food industry and the history of the foods you're interested in. Because every food, every dish, there is a story behind it, whether it's, Peking duck or it's a souffle. There's always a story behind it. And it's actually usually pretty interesting because it does put you in a place and time. And I think that context always brings so much more light to like what you're eating.
Great advice for Aria, I feel like. Yeah, and then we have room for one more last question, which I think is great to end on. Peter, what is your next project?
Oh, gosh.
Do tell.
Boy, I know. Listen, who knows if a next cookbook is in the works. I think when you do something for the first time and you kind of are bumbling along, you kind of want to do something the next time because you know the process a bit more. So that would be nice. I'll put that out there in the universe. But I think, unlike my fashion days, I'm just trying to live in the moment. I'm just trying to appreciate the years of work that I put into this and the amazing people I got to work with and the amazing people that inspired me, and just be grateful and sort of be happy that I have this book that's in the universe. So that's the most exciting part of all. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah, just be happy with what you have in the moment.
Exactly.
It's a great takeaway. And with that, we conclude. Everyone, thank you so much. Thank you, Peter Somm.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Flora.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Author of Family Style, Elegant Everyday Recipes Inspired by Home and Heritage. By the way, there could not be a more perfect name for the book. And we encourage everyone to pick up a copy right here or at your local bookstore. And thank you so much for being with us. I was Flora Tsapowski, and have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.